Ever wondered what really happened behind the scenes of Michael Caine's bearded German mercenary epic? From tragic deaths on set to lost musical recordings and bizarre accent choices, The Last Valley holds secrets stranger than its 30 years war setting. Buckle up for surprising revelations about this forgotten 1971 masterpiece. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about The Last Valley. 1971. Fact 1. An actor died before filming even began. The Last Valley holds a tragic distinction in cinema history that most people never knew about. Actor Martin Miller, a Czech-Austrian actor who had appeared in dozens of British films throughout the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, was cast in a role for the production and traveled to the filming location in Innsbruck, Austria, ready to begin work. However, on August 26, 1969, just as the production was set to start shooting, Miller collapsed on set and died of a heart attack at the age of 69. What makes this tragedy even more haunting is that he died before a single scene had been filmed, meaning he never got to perform even one moment of the role he had traveled so far to play. Martin Miller had built a respected career playing eccentric doctors, scientists, and professors in notable films like The Third Man, Peeping Tom, and The Pink Panther, and he was particularly famous in British theater for his parodies of Adolf Hitler during World War II and his long-running role in Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap. His death on the Austrian set cast a shadow over the production before it even began, and the filmmakers had to quickly recast his part. The role was ultimately taken over by Edward Underdown, another British character actor who stepped in to fill the position that Miller never had the chance to bring to life. This somber start to filming was just one of many challenges The Last Valley would face during its troubled production, but it remains one of the most tragic moments in the film's behind-the-scenes history. Fact 2. The Last Hurrah for Todd. A.O. 70mm. The Last Valley holds a unique place in cinematic history as the final feature film ever photographed using the prestigious Todd AO 70mm widescreen process, marking the end of an era for this groundbreaking film format. Todd AO had been developed in the early 1950s as a revolutionary widescreen system that could capture incredibly detailed and expansive images, and it had been used for some of Hollywood's biggest spectacles, including Oklahoma, Around the World in 80 Days, The Sound of Music, and Cleopatra. The format was known for producing stunningly crisp and immersive visuals that made audiences feel like they were right in the middle of the action, with a much wider field of view than standard film stock could provide. When The Last Valley wrapped production in December of 1969, no one realized it would be the last time this prestigious format would be used for a narrative feature film for the next 2 decades. The Todd AO process was expensive and technically demanding, requiring special cameras, film stock, and projection equipment, and as Hollywood moved away from big-budget roadshow presentations in the early 1970s, the format fell out of favor. The 70mm film stock sat unused in storage until 1991, when filmmaker Ron Fricke decided to revive Todd AO for his experimental documentary Baraka, which featured sweeping landscape photography and cultural imagery from around the world. For 20 years, The Last Valley remained the final chapter in Todd AO's original golden age, making it both the end of one era and an unintentional time capsule of grand cinematic ambition. Fact 3. Brian Blessed's film debut was brief and brutal. Brian Blessed, who would later become famous for his booming voice and larger-than-life performances in films like Flash Gordon and television series like I, Claudius, made his very first film appearance in The Last Valley, and his debut was memorably short-lived and violent. Blessed played a character named Korsky, who serves as the second-in-command to Michael Caine's mercenary captain in the opening section of the film. The character appears early in the story when the band of soldiers discovers the hidden valley. And Korsky objects strongly to the idea of staying in the peaceful village instead of pillaging it and moving on, as the mercenaries had done to countless other settlements during the 30 Years' War. In a shocking and sudden turn of events, Michael Caine's character responds to Korsky's defiance by removing his own spiked helmet and using it as a weapon to fatally stab Blessed's character in the stomach, establishing just how ruthless and unpredictable the captain could be. This brutal death scene comes very early in the film, meaning that Blessed's first movie role ended with him being violently killed off before the story really even got going. Despite the grim nature of his character's fate, Blessed later spoke positively about his experience making the film, recalling that it was a happy experience for everyone involved and that the director and management were extremely kind to the cast, doing everything in their power to make them comfortable during the production in the Austrian mountains. Fact 4. Michael Caine's bizarre German accent strategy. Michael Caine faced a unique challenge in The Last Valley because he was playing a German mercenary captain, and he had to figure out how to make the character sound authentic without falling into the trap of doing a cartoonish German accent. Rather than attempting the stereotypical approach that most actors would take, Caine came up with an unusual strategy that he explained in interviews years later. He said that he thought the obvious trap would be to play a German like a man trying to do a German accent. So instead, he decided to play his character like a German trying to speak perfect English. To prepare for this unconventional approach, Caine hired German dialect records and listened to them non-stop for several days, paying close attention to the underlying speech patterns and rhythms of native German speakers. Then he deliberately put the obvious accent out of his mind and focused on trying to speak good English, but with the German person's basic speech pattern beneath it. The result was something critics found divisive and audiences found somewhat puzzling, with some reviewers describing his accent as comic, iffy, and unintentionally funny at times. One reviewer noted that Caine seemed to forget he was supposed to be a 17th century German and would slip into sounding like Michael Caine for most of the movie, while his Cockney accent showed through with traces of what sounded like a comedy German accent layered on top. Interestingly, Caine was apparently the only member of the cast who bothered attempting any kind of German accent at all, making his character stand out even more oddly among the diverse-sounding group of mercenaries. Fact 5. The village was built using period authentic techniques. The Last Valley took historical authenticity to an extraordinary level that most modern films would never even attempt, as every single building visible in the film was actually constructed from scratch using traditional 17th century building techniques. The production team didn't rely on existing structures or facades, instead choosing to create an entire functioning village in a remote isolated valley in the Tyrol region of Austria. What made this approach even more remarkable was that the filmmakers drafted local craftsmen from the surrounding Austrian towns who still possessed knowledge of traditional building methods that had been passed down through generations. These skilled workers used the same construction techniques that would have been employed during the actual time period the film depicts, working with authentic materials and following historical building practices to create structures that looked genuinely period appropriate rather than like Hollywood set pieces. The attention to detail extended to every aspect of the village construction, from the way the timber frames were assembled to how the roofs were thatched and the stone foundations were laid. This painstaking approach created a totally convincing backdrop that makes the film feel genuinely immersive, with the village looking like it had actually existed in that valley for centuries, rather than having been built specifically for a movie production. The stunning valley location itself, nestled in the breathtaking Tyrolean mountains, combined with these authentically constructed buildings to create some of the most visually impressive shots in the entire film. The remote setting meant the production was isolated from modern intrusions, allowing the cameras to capture sweeping views of the village that truly transported audiences back to the 30 Years' War period without any anachronistic elements breaking the illusion. Fact 6. Omar Sharif juggled two films. Simultaneously, Omar Sharif found himself in an incredibly demanding situation during the production of The Last Valley, because he was simultaneously committed to filming another major motion picture called The Horseman, which was being produced by Columbia Pictures. This meant that Sharif was essentially working on two completely different film productions at the same time, bouncing back and forth between the projects in what must have been an exhausting schedule for the actor. The Horseman was an adventure drama directed by John Frankenheimer and set in Afghanistan, featuring Sharif alongside Jack Palance in a story centered around a brutal traditional sport called buzkashi, making it a physically demanding role that required extensive location shooting. The scheduling conflict created significant logistical challenges for both productions, but it was the Horsemen that had to make the most substantial accommodations to work around Sharif's commitment to the Last Valley. According to production reports from June of 1969, the Horsemen's entire shooting schedule had to be split into separate segments specifically to accommodate Sharif's availability, allowing him to fulfill his obligations to both films without completely abandoning either project. This kind of arrangement was relatively unusual for major studio productions, as it meant coordinating cast, crew, locations, and equipment around one actor's complicated schedule across two different movies being shot in different parts of the world. The fact that both productions were willing to make these compromises speaks to Sharif's star power at the time, as he was one of the biggest international actors following his acclaimed performances in Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, making him valuable enough that studios would rearrange entire filming schedules to secure his participation. Fact 7. Clavell wrote Shogun to prove himself. After this, James Clavell made a revealing statement before he began production on The Last Valley that would prove to be surprisingly prophetic about the direction his career would take after the film was completed. In interviews conducted before shooting started, Clavell said that after making The Last Valley, he planned to write another book afterwards to see if he had still got it, suggesting that he was feeling uncertain about his abilities as a novelist and wanted to test himself by returning to the world of literature. This comment is particularly interesting because Clavell had already established himself as a successful writer with novels like King Rat and Taipan, but his focus on filmmaking as a director, producer, and screenwriter had pulled him away from novel writing for several years. True to his word, after The Last Valley wrapped and was released to disappointing box office results, Clavell returned to writing and spent the next 3 years researching and crafting his next novel. That book turned out to be Shogun, published in 1975, which became not only his most famous and successful work, but also one of the biggest best-selling novels of the entire decade. Shogun, set in feudal Japan and following an English navigator who becomes involved with samurai culture, was a massive cultural phenomenon that was later adapted into an enormously popular television miniseries in 1980 that attracted an estimated 130 million viewers. The fact that Clavell felt the need to prove himself through writing after making The Last Valley suggests that the troubled production and commercial failure of the film may have shaken his confidence and motivated him to return to the medium where he could exercise more complete creative control. Fact 8. A $7 million box office disaster. The Last Valley presents one of the most paradoxical box office stories in cinema history, as it managed to be both a success and a complete financial disaster at the same time, depending on where you looked. In Britain, the film actually performed quite well and was listed as one of the most popular movies at the British box office in 1971, suggesting that British audiences connected with the historical epic and turned out to see it in respectable numbers. However, when the worldwide financial results were tallied up, the picture became devastatingly clear that the film was an expensive failure on a massive scale. The North American box office was particularly brutal, with the film earning only $380,000 in rentals, which was an absolutely dismal figure for a major studio production with 2 international stars. The international markets outside of Britain didn't fare much better, bringing in only $900,000 in additional rentals. When distribution costs were deducted from these meager earnings and compared against the film's production budget, which had been around $11 million, the final accounting revealed a catastrophic overall loss of $7,185,000. This staggering financial loss made The Last Valley one of the biggest box office bombs of 1971 and effectively ended James Clavell's career as a film director, as no studio would be willing to finance another project from someone who had just lost over $7 million on a single picture. The film's failure was attributed to various factors, including poor timing, as audiences in the midst of the Vietnam War weren't interested in watching another lengthy war film set in medieval Europe, and the decline of the roadshow epic format that had once made these kinds of prestige pictures profitable. Fact 9. The original soundtrack, master tapes, are lost forever. John Barry's musical score for The Last Valley has long been considered one of his finest and most sophisticated compositions, ranking alongside his acclaimed work on films like The Lion in Winter and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But a tragic discovery was made decades after the film's release that music preservationists and Barry fans found devastating. The score features thunderous orchestral power, haunting choral arrangements, and complex dramatic themes that perfectly capture both the brutality of the 30 Years' War and the peaceful sanctuary of the Hidden Valley, making it a favorite among soundtrack collectors who consider it an essential part of Barry's historical period film work from the late 1960s and early 1970s. In the early 2000s, when producers began planning a special expanded CD release of the complete score that would include all the music Barry had written and recorded for the film, they made a heartbreaking discovery during their research. The complete original recording session tapes that had been recorded by sound engineer John Richards at CTS Studios had either been lost or destroyed at some point in the decades following the film's release, meaning that the full unedited performances no longer existed in any archive or storage facility. The only surviving recordings were the edited tracks that had been released on the original 1971 LP album, which represented a shortened version of the score with certain cues trimmed or omitted entirely. This meant that any expanded or complete edition of the score would be impossible to produce from the original source recordings, and in 2001, Silva Screen Records had to commission an entirely new recording of the complete score conducted by Nick Raine with the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra to give fans access to the full musical work. Fact 10. It had 3 different working titles. The Last Valley went through an unusually indecisive journey when it came to settling on its final title, with the production cycling through at least 3 different options before eventually landing on the name that audiences would see on theater marquees. The film was based on a novel by J.B. Pick that had been published in 1959, and while adapting the source material, director and screenwriter James Clavell and the studio executives apparently struggled to find the right title that would capture the essence of the story while also being marketable to audiences who knew nothing about the 30 Years' War setting. At one stage during pre-production and early filming, the movie was going to be called Somewhere in the Mountains There Is a Last Valley, which was an extremely long and unwieldy title that would have been difficult to fit on posters and advertising materials. A first draft screenplay dated May 13, 1969, actually bears this lengthy working title, showing that it was seriously considered for at least part of the production process. The title attempted to convey the sense of discovery and hidden sanctuary that is central to the plot, but its excessive length likely made studio executives nervous about how it would play with general audiences. The production then shifted to a simpler alternative, considering the shortened version A Last Valley, which removed the overly descriptive opening phrase while still keeping the core concept of the valley as the focal point. Eventually, the team decided to trim it down even further to just The Last Valley, which became the final theatrical release title and the name by which the film has been known ever since, though some production charts and early documentation still listed it under the alternate titles. Fact 11. Caine and Sharif's massive paychecks. The 2 lead actors in The Last Valley commanded enormous salaries that reflected their status as major international stars in the late 1960s, with Michael Caine receiving $750,000 for his role as the captain and Omar Sharif being paid $600,000 to play Vogel the teacher. To put these figures into perspective, these were absolutely massive paychecks for 1969, when the average American household income was only around $9,000 per year, meaning that Caine's salary alone was equivalent to over 80 years of average earnings for a typical family at that time. The combined cost of securing these 2 stars ate up a substantial portion of the film's overall budget and contributed significantly to The Last Valley becoming the biggest budgeted production that ABC Pictures had undertaken up to that point in the company's history. The total estimated budget for the film reached approximately $11 million, which was an enormous sum for a historical drama in that era, especially one that lacked the guaranteed audience appeal of a biblical epic or a musical spectacular. ABC Pictures was taking a significant financial risk by investing so heavily in a film about the relatively obscure 30 Years' War, banking on the star power of Caine and Sharif to draw audiences into theaters. Both actors were at the height of their fame when they signed on to the project, with Caine having recently starred in hits like The Italian Job and Sharif still riding high on his success from Dr. Zhivago and Funny Girl, which made them valuable commodities that could demand top-tier compensation. The studio clearly believed that paying these premium salaries would guarantee box office success, though as the film's eventual financial disaster proved, even the biggest stars couldn't overcome poor timing and audience disinterest. Fact 12. A Carnegie Mellon History Class Assignment. The Last Valley achieved something that very few Hollywood films have ever managed to accomplish, as it became required viewing for history courses at Carnegie Mellon University due to its exceptional historical accuracy and authentic portrayal of life during the 30 Years' War, at least one. Former Carnegie Mellon student who took history classes at the university recalled years later that the film was mandatory viewing when studying the period from 1618 to 1648, which speaks volumes about how seriously historians and educators took the film's depiction of this brutal and complex conflict that shaped the future of Germany and Central Europe. The 30 Years' War is notoriously difficult to teach because of its incredibly complicated nature, with constantly shifting alliances, multiple religious factions fighting each other, and a level of devastation that is hard for modern students to comprehend, as the conflict killed an estimated 8 million people and left whole regions of Germany completely depopulated and economically destroyed for over a century. The fact that professors chose to use The Last Valley as an educational tool suggests that they believed the film captured something essential about the period that textbooks and lectures alone could not convey, particularly the day-to-day reality of how the war affected ordinary villagers and the mercenary soldiers who moved from battle to battle with no real loyalty to any cause beyond survival and payment. The film's attention to historical detail in terms of costumes, weapons, religious conflicts, and the social dynamics between different classes made it valuable as a teaching resource, even though it was ultimately a work of fiction based on a novel rather than a documentary. This academic recognition stands in stark contrast to the film's commercial failure, proving that critical and educational merit don't always translate into box office success. Fact 13. John Barry had 6 months to compose. John Barry received an extraordinarily generous amount of time to compose the musical score for The Last Valley, as he was given a full 6 months to write the music after the film's final edit was completed, which was an almost unheard of luxury in the world of Hollywood film scoring. To understand just how unusual this timeline was, most film composers in that era were typically given only a few weeks or at most a couple of months to compose, orchestrate, and record an entire film score, often working under intense pressure to meet tight deadlines imposed by studio release schedules and post-production timelines. Barry had just won an Academy Award for his work on The Lion in Winter in 1968, making him the natural choice for another historical costume drama, and the extended composition period allowed him to craft one of the most sophisticated and ambitious scores of his entire career. The extra time meant that Barry could experiment with complex orchestral arrangements, develop multiple thematic motifs for different characters and situations, and create the extensive choral writing that became one of the score's most distinctive and praised elements. The opening title sequence alone features stunning choral music that sets an epic and haunting tone, and this kind of elaborate vocal arrangement required significant time to compose, rehearse, and record properly. The result of this luxurious timeline was a score that film music enthusiasts and critics still regard as one of Barry's very best works, standing alongside his most celebrated compositions from the James Bond films and his other historical dramas like Mary Queen of Scots. The music ranges from thunderous action cues to delicate romantic themes, all woven together with a level of craftsmanship that only becomes possible when a composer has adequate time to fully develop their ideas. Fact 14. A historical error: the dead general. Despite The Last Valley's generally strong reputation for historical accuracy, the film contains a significant anachronistic error that sharp-eyed history buffs and attentive viewers have pointed out over the years. Near the end of the film, when the captain prepares to leave the valley and return to the war, he explicitly states his intention to seek employment with the army of Prince Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar, who was a real historical figure and prominent military commander during the 30 Years' War. However, the film's own internal timeline creates an impossible situation because of another piece of dialogue earlier in the story. At one point during the film, the captain makes reference to the sack of Magdeburg being 12 years in the past, which allows viewers to calculate exactly when the story is taking place. The sack of Magdeburg was a real historical event that occurred in 1632, so if 12 years have passed since then, the events of the film must be happening in 1644, specifically in the spring when the captain and his men leave the valley. The problem with this timeline becomes immediately apparent to anyone familiar with the history of the 30 Years' War, because Prince Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar actually died in 1639, meaning he had been dead for 5 years by the time the captain supposedly planned to join his army. This creates a clear historical impossibility that the filmmakers apparently missed during the scripting and production process. Though it's the kind of error that only someone with detailed knowledge of 30 Years' War military history would likely notice. The mistake is particularly surprising given how much effort the production put into other aspects of historical authenticity, from the authentic building techniques to the careful attention to period costumes and weapons. Fact 15. Caine knew it would flop immediately. Michael Caine possessed an unfortunate prescience about The Last Valley's commercial prospects, as he later admitted in interviews and his memoirs that he knew pretty well as soon as they finished filming that it wasn't going to work at the box office. This kind of insight from an actor about their own film's fate, is relatively rare, as most performers maintain optimistic public faces about their projects, even when they have private doubts. But Caine was remarkably candid about recognizing the warning signs that The Last Valley was heading for commercial disaster even before it reached theaters. In his memoirs, Caine explained his theory about why the film failed so dramatically with audiences, attributing the problem primarily to terrible timing rather than any fundamental flaws in the filmmaking itself. He pointed out that they were in the midst of the Vietnam War when the film was released, and American audiences in particular had no interest in watching another lengthy war film, even one set during a completely different conflict in medieval Germany centuries earlier. The war weariness of the early 1970s meant that people wanted escapism and entertainment rather than grim historical dramas about religious warfare, violence, and suffering, no matter how well made those films might be. Despite his accurate prediction of the film's commercial failure and his disappointment with the audience reaction, Caine maintained positive feelings about the project itself and later called it the most disappointing picture he ever made, clarifying that it was disappointing not because of the finished film, but because of how audiences responded to it. He stated that he liked the film very much and often cited the role as one of his personal favorites among his many performances.